prices remain high and interest rates are holding steady somewhere between 6 and 8% depending on what type of loan you're going with. So if you've been sitting on the sideline waiting for the right time to invest in real estate, you might be wondering to yourself, is it even worth it anymore? And does it even make sense to invest in real estate at all right now? As a real estate investor, I'm constantly looking for new ways to adapt and keep up with the ever-changing real estate market. And I do still believe that investing in real estate is a great way to set yourself up for a successful financial future. And since I started investing in real estate nearly a decade ago, I have personally seen my own net worth grow significantly. However, times are definitely changing, as we're all very well aware of. And I was thinking the other day, if I had to start investing in real estate now, I might do things a little bit differently. So in today's video, I wanted to talk about some ideas to help you get in the game and start investing in real estate this year. If you're new here, welcome. My name is Melissa. I work as a real estate investor, a real estate professional, and I own and run quite a few other e-commerce and software-based businesses. I invest primarily in the Colorado real estate market, but I've acquired quite a few units and I'm continuing to grow and invest my real estate business all the time. All of my rentals are long-term buy and hold rentals where our tenants are on a 1-year lease. And the general premise here is that we buy rundown properties. So think of buying the worst house in the best neighborhood. We pay to have them renovated and fix them up so that they're beautiful and brand new, and then they have minimal maintenance costs so that we can get premium rents, we can cash flow a decent amount every single month, and this is all proving to be fairly passive income. Now, if you're a fellow investor, then you know that the biggest challenge now, with interest rates remaining high and there not being any great market adjustment in terms of price, the main challenge facing most real estate investors right now is being able to cash flow on a property. Now, at the time of making this video, interest rates are nearly double what I was paying when I started investing in real estate nearly 10 years ago. And that means a huge chunk of money will go toward your mortgage each month instead of just going into your bank account as profit. And as we all know, if you can't end up renting your properties for more than your mortgage is, you're obviously going to be losing money in the long run. And that's leaving real estate investors in a few difficult situations. So they can either choose to not cash flow on their properties, they can choose to put significantly more money down on those properties to ensure that they will cash flow. They can pay for those properties fully in cash, or they can rely on hard money lenders. So all that to say, while it's not impossible to get into the real estate market today, it's certainly more challenging than it used to be. So let's get into some ideas to help you get started. Tip number 1 is to keep your finances in order. Now, if you're even thinking about buying real estate or investing in the real estate market, I would wager that you're probably a pretty financially savvy individual. So make sure that you're keeping up with your good budgeting and saving habits, and you're really continuing to build that real estate nest egg so that you have the capital you need to submit your offer right away once that perfect property hits the market. That could even mean having a lender picked out and having an updated pre-approval letter ready to go if you plan on financing your next property. So for example, the average home price in Colorado is $553,000. Now, with that information, we can approach this in a few different ways. So if you plan on this being your primary residence and you don't want to have to pay mortgage insurance, then you'll have to put down 20% on the property. So that's a little bit over $110,000. Now, if you're okay with paying mortgage insurance, then you could always get an FHA loan and put down as little as 3.5%. Again, you'll have to pay mortgage insurance, and this is all assuming that you're going to live there. Or if you've served in the military or in the armed forces, you could look into getting a VA loan and you wouldn't have to put any money down at all. Now, honestly, if I was to start over completely in real estate today and I didn't have a lot of capital to work with, I would probably look into house hacking. So house hacking is essentially when, let's say you're buying a duplex, triplex, or fourplex, and you plan on living in one of the units on the property and renting out the rest. Now, this is great because you're building equity in the property, and at the same time, the rent that you get from the other tenants that live there is probably going to be more than enough to cover the mortgage and maybe even cash flow a little bit so that you can save that money and put it into your next real estate deal. Now, on the flip side, if this is truly just going to be an investment property, you don't plan on living there, you will have to put down 25% on the property, which is $138,000. And in addition to having the money to put down on the property to begin with, you should also focus on having a really good credit score. So at minimum, a credit score of 740, because anything over 740 will get you the best interest rates possible. Now, another option that I haven't mentioned yet, but I actually chose to use on all of my investment properties because I have a good relationship with our local credit union, is something called a portfolio loan. Now, as I said, it's definitely worth calling around and checking with your local banks and credit unions. These often have much more flexible terms. Perhaps they have better interest rates. I know that mine did, almost by an entire percentage point. And the final option that you could look into, especially since interest rates are so high, is called seller financing. Now, there is the possibility that whatever property you're trying to buy is potentially paid off if the previous owner either bought it in cash or has owned it for a really long time. And the other option, if the property isn't paid off, is that that person likely purchased that property or chose to refinance when interest rates were somewhere between 2 and 3%. So in those situations, essentially the current owner would carry the debt on the property instead of a bank, like we do with traditional financing. But because that's the case, you can often negotiate better than market rate interest rates. And the upside for the seller is that they're making interest on the money that they are essentially lending you. Tip number 2 is educate yourself and make connections. Now, as a lot of people do before jumping into any new business venture, people research and read all about real estate investing. And that can be really great for people. And there's obviously a time and a place for that. However, I am a firm believer that absolutely nothing can replace real world experience. So sometimes you just have to start, just buy something. Now, obviously, I'm not telling you to go out and purchase the first property you see. I personally like to look at tens, if not hundreds of properties before I find one that I think actually makes sense financially and has the potential to cash flow and make me money in the long run. So obviously run your own numbers, do your own due diligence, and make very informed and smart decisions so that you're not buying yourself a headache from the very beginning. But once you do find a property that fits all of those criteria, make sure that you're actually getting into the game. So make your first purchase or your first few purchases. So try out a small single family home or even a duplex or a small apartment building that you can manage yourself, and you'll very quickly learn an invaluable amount of information by just being thrown into the mix and figuring things out. I'm also always on Zillow, LoopNet, and Crexy looking for deals. And I've also started going to real estate auctions in my county that happen every Wednesday. So make sure that you're checking your local schedule as well. They auction off foreclosed properties, and you can sometimes pick them up for a pretty good deal. Granted, you do have to buy them in cash. But when it comes to analyzing the deal, make sure that there is some meat on the bones to be had. So like I said, look for value add properties that are well below market rents. I personally pay to have them renovated. I have renovated properties in the past on my own, and I've come to find out just how valuable my time is. My time is much better spent in the process of making money so that I can pay people to much more quickly renovate my properties and get them rented for me. And then you can even look into maybe charging extra for things like parking, laundry, or even storage space. Now, when I'm talking about cash on cash return, that will vary greatly across the country. I would say I see brokers listing properties at a 4 or 5 cap, and that is just laughable considering you would be underwater on those deals because your interest rate on those properties would be more than your cap rate. Now, in other areas where cost of living might not be so high, the cash on cash return tends to be a little bit higher. So make sure that you're doing, again, your research, your due diligence to see what your expectations should be based on where you're going to be investing. And once you found properties that could work for you, start submitting your offers. And don't be submitting full price offers unless you really think that the property is worth that amount. I submit lowball offers all the time. And there's nothing wrong with that. You're not going to insult anybody. This is business. And especially in the world of commercial real estate, I feel like the listing price is honestly just a suggestion. So I always run my own numbers, figure out what the property is worth, how much I'm going to have to put into it, and how much it's going to be worth to me personally in the end. And then that's how I decide what my offer is going to be. So this is completely different than making an offer on a home, especially a home where you plan on living, where that situation could become kind of an emotional investment. Think of this as a business investment. If the numbers don't make sense, then move on to the next deal. Don't get attached to the properties because 1, these are a huge investment, and 2, you're running a business, not a charity. And to support my idea of making lowball offers, people in the business world are much more likely to potentially accept or at least work with you and make a counter offer than someone who's selling their personal home. And that's for a few reasons. So investors may be more motivated to sell if they are 1031ing that property or that building into another one and they're working on a very limited time frame. The second option is that they may just want to get out of the real estate game. They're sick of managing properties, they're sick of managing tenants, and they just want to be done. And the third option could be, which I run into all the time, is that they simply just don't understand the market. They're not keeping up with what market rents should be. They don't know what their property is really worth or what it potentially could be worth in the future. Now, the other thing I wanted to talk about here in terms of educating yourself is to essentially expect hiccups. Now, hiccups come up in real estate all the time. When I talk about how I spend a lot of my days putting out fires, that's what I'm talking about. I'm usually dealing with a tenant issue, a building issue, a renovation issue, any of those things. Because after all, depending on how old the buildings are that you plan on purchasing, there's inevitably going to be some level of deferred maintenance that you're going to have to deal with. And once you've got those first few years of real estate investing under your belt, you'll have learned far more about tenant relations, local regulations, lease requirements, maintenance issues, and financing than any book could ever teach you. Now, the second portion of this tip was making connections. And what I mean by this is working on finding potentially like-minded real estate investors that live near and around you. As we've already established, buying real estate certainly isn't cheap. And finding other people with similar goals could mean that you end up buying properties together. And this could result in you buying more properties in a shorter period of time. Granted, if you do that, you'll own a portion of whatever property you purchase rather than owning the entire property outright. But it can be nice to have a business partner to bounce ideas off of, help delegate things like renovation tasks to, and then help with tenant management. But no matter who your partner ends up being, even if it's your spouse, you need to have a legal agreement written up saying exactly what percentage of the business each of you owns and exactly which portions of the business each of you owns. And if you're looking to make some friends in the real estate space, you can always try looking on Meetup. I've found quite a few networks and connections locally that way, and it makes it easier to attend events and see what other people are going through. Or you can, of course, try attending a real estate conference. Now, I personally don't think that you need to spend thousands and thousands of dollars taking a real estate investor's course or flying to real estate investors conferences all over the US, unless, of course, you have the means to do that. It seems like there's things popping up, new problems that I haven't come across yet all the time. And so it is kind of refreshing to be able to have that real estate group of friends that I can just bounce some ideas off of, see if any of them have been in a similar situation and see how they handled it. And it's nice to be able to talk to people who have been in a similar situation. Tip number 3, determine a target market. So there are a few things to consider here. So the first being, can you afford to buy in your local market? And if you can, that's wonderful, but make sure that you're really narrowing down where you would like to search and purchase. I personally try to pay attention to the up and coming or the nicer and safer parts of whatever town I'm planning to buy in. So I take a look at the crime map and all of those things. And typically how higher cost of areas work is that obviously properties cost more here, but you generally see more appreciation because there's simply more demand for properties. So over time, you'll make more on appreciation. And then essentially cash flow is based on how you purchase the property. So if you overpaid for the property to begin with, you likely might not cash flow or you'll just break even. So the goal is to buy assets in places that are poised for value growth over time so that you can tap into this equity later on to help you finance future deals or so that you can sell for a profit down the road. Now you can always buy elsewhere, so somewhere that is not local to you, and you can always hire a property manager to deal with your properties there. And in lower cost of living areas, you might see almost zero gain from appreciation, but you'll likely cash flow a decent amount because your mortgage will be so low and the cost of the property is minimal. Now, I'm not saying there's a right or wrong here. You're just going to have to figure out what works best for you. The second factor to consider is who's going to manage the property. So obviously, if you live locally, then you can manage your own properties. That's what I'm doing until we reach about 50 units. And then I'm planning on hiring a full-time property manager to help us out. And by doing that, I'm also saving us a good chunk of money because a typical property manager charges anywhere between 8 and 12%. And I also think acting as your own property manager before you scale your business is pretty important because it teaches you the fundamentals of tenant and property management. So think screening tenants, filling vacancies, and establishing high occupancy among all of your units. The third thing to consider is having staff on call. So whether the property is rural or urban, I always make sure that I have a list of trusted tradespeople nearby. So that could be a plumber for middle of the night leaks, an electrician for any kind of electrical problems. So just make sure that the property isn't too remote that you can't get anybody to service it. The fourth thing to consider is identifying up and coming markets. So if you're fine with buying elsewhere, you probably don't want to pay exorbitant prices like LA prices or somewhere where prices have already spiked. Rather look for places that haven't peaked yet or are on their way up. So maybe consider Nashville or Charlotte, and obviously pay attention to any chatter of kind of up and coming places in these real estate groups and connections that you're making. Now, obviously it's nice to buy properties really cheap, but at the same time, you also want to make sure that there's enough demand, that there's enough people there looking to rent properties so that you can actually make money. I have the Crexy software for real estate investors, and that's been incredibly helpful. And it allows me to pinpoint the most lucrative investment opportunities, now allowing me to see data like population growth, income growth, demographics, job growth, overall housing demand, current home prices, and renter to owner ratios, as well as big businesses that might be drawing in a lot of workers that need housing. And I can even look at up and coming developments that may be competitors when you're ready to list your property for rent. But there are tons of other software that offer similar data. So my point in saying all of this is that you want all of this data at your fingertips so that you can become essentially an expert on the neighborhoods and the areas that you're looking to invest in, so that you can really study them and make the most informed decision. Tip number 4, find the right agent or broker to work with. Now, if you don't have your own realtor's license and you can't work your own deals, then you're gonna have to have a realtor or realtors that you can call anytime, day or night, when a new property hits the market. And that's because in real estate investing, time is of the essence. Typically, whoever walks the property and submits their offer first has a leg up on everybody else. However, in today's crazy real estate market, I'm seeing more and more sight unseen offers simply based on forecasted numbers. Now, another thing I wanted to mention about finding the right agent is that you need to find the right agent in whatever kind of property you're targeting. So for example, I am targeting commercial real estate. My next acquisition will be a commercial apartment building. And so no offense, as much as I like our residential real estate brokers, they don't work in the commercial space, and so they aren't going to be as helpful to me. So I've been seeking out commercial realtors to work with specifically who are much more familiar with that space and who could even potentially help me find off-market deals. And that's because what I'm really finding in the commercial space is that any properties that actually end up being listed on LoopNet or Crexi are probably things that off-market people didn't want. And so it's all of the leftover material that's actually going to market. Now, of course, if you're comfortable doing it, you can always take some of this into your own hands and do some cold calling, do some door knocking, or even send out some mailers. So all of that to say, finding the right agent for you, whether residential or commercial, is really crucial. Tip number 5, decide your investing strategy. So essentially what I mean here is that you need to decide if you're going to be doing this casually, picking up a property every few years, treating it as a side business, or if you're going all in and you're really treating this as a business. Now, if simply because of your income, you have to do this on a more casual basis, that's completely fine. Again, do whatever works for you. However, I would say that real estate investing and real estate in general typically rewards people who are very consistent. That means getting really good at underwriting and analyzing properties, honing in on missed opportunities for each property that you own, and understanding how to force appreciation via renovation and then optimizing rental income. Now, as a more serious real estate investor, I get questions all the time from more casual real estate investors asking me questions that they should really know the answer to. Things like, should I be increasing my rent? How much should I increase my rent by this year? And also recommendations for other tradespeople. Now, if you're really treating this like a business, so off the top of your head, you should know your expenses, you should know your reserves that you have in the real estate business and your monthly cash flow. And you also need to stay on top of market research so that you know exactly how much you can rent your unit for, and if you plan on doing any capital improvements, where that money is best spent. And then, of course, if this is going to be a long-term play for you, decide what your market is going to be. So are you going to be focused on student housing? Maybe you live near a college campus. Maybe you want to focus on multifamily or commercial real estate or even industrial real estate. So pick your niche and focus on that. Investing in real estate has undoubtedly changed over the years, and strategies that may have worked well in the past may not work so well today. So it's really up to you to try to find what works best for you and your business. Real estate investing can be really challenging. And of course, we've all had our ups and downs. But the name of the game is really making smart, educated, informed decisions in terms of buying assets and building lasting wealth. So don't give up. Remember, real estate investing is a marathon and definitely not a sprint. Let me know in the comment section down below what your real estate investing goals are. If you found this video helpful, please do me a huge favor and like this video and subscribe. Feel free to follow me on my social channels right here, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.